Hey mates, here we go. Here's a part 2 video of Grand Lake St. Mary's. You guys should watch my first one. That way you guys already have an idea of what I'm already talking about. This is basically a continuation. So if this is your first video you're seeing, make sure you watch my part 1 first. Because, well, part 1 really covers the introduction, basically. So, Grand Lake St. Mary's, as I mentioned in my last video, has a very rich history. So, it wasn't until it reached into the early 1900s that the Grand Lake officially became a designated state park, basically. So, what I'm trying to say is, it's the state of Ohio who owns the Grand Lake. So basically, stakeholders in this area, if they want to do anything with this lake for restoration, they have to run it through the state first. And sometimes that can really be a pain, because oftentimes when it comes to the environment, the legislators are very slow, and the legislators are more after the money than taking care of the environment as a steward. That's how it is. But the way I see it, you can't eat money. You sure can't. But there are things in the lake that we do need. However, though, it's unsafe to consume. I will actually explain that right now. So, I'm going to get a little closer to the water for you guys, just so that you can really see what it is that I want to talk about. So, I'm sure many of you have mentioned, or have seen me mention some videos about Lake Okeechobee, right? And how it has some of their own issues with contamination. Well, in a sense, the Grand Lake has a very similar issue, but of course on a much smaller scale, because Lake Okeechobee is huge down in Florida. And by the way, that is still on my bucket list, as I have not even been there yet. So hopefully I can do that this year still. But not trying to digress. So there is a similarity though between Lake Okeechobee and Grand Lake. They both have a cyanobacteria bloom, basically, I should say. So, there are really two known types of blue-green algae that resides in this water. Even though cyanobacteria isn't fully the same thing as algae itself. But basically, the two types include, one of them starts with, give me a moment, one of them starts with an M. Yeah, Microcystis. So it's basically a freshwater type of cyanobacteria. And they actually release a toxin that is known as microcystin. And then the second type starts with an A. It's a complicated name. It's Aphanizomenon, and it actually releases 3 different types of toxins. They can include spermopsin, Satitoxin, and Anatoxin. And by the way, I will spell those out in the video description. So yes, you could say that the cyanobacteria that resides in these waters also release toxins, especially in the water. But they can also become airborne too. So it's even similar to that of the red tide harmful algal bloom, which is found in marine waters. But the thing is, the problem with the toxins is, if we were to swim in this water and even drink it, we could actually risk possible death. Just because we can face organ failure, vital organs, liver failure, loss of coordination, even hallucinations. It gets pretty serious. And you can even get rashes on your skin from being in this water. Because I actually remember I probably had to be about, probably had to be about 5 or 6. I actually remember I went on a boat out here. And some of my family and I, we actually went to swim in this very water. And what happened was, I remember on my skin, I actually started to have like little red spots. I mean, fortunately it wasn't severe, you know, for it to be the point to go to a hospital, but it still definitely raised a red flag, you know, that something was not right with this water. So you could say since then I've never went in the water ever again. And honestly, it's actually quite amazing how there are still even fish who live in these waters, you know, whether it be smallmouth bass, crappie. I'm not saying crappie as in, oh, that's crappie. That's actually a type of fish. Or even bluegills, too, just to name a couple. But the problem is, you can't eat any fish that is from this water, just because of the severity of the cyanobacteria. Or else you can possibly risk getting parasitic shellfish poisoning. And it was actually in 2010 that was actually one of the worst years for the blooms. A lot of the people who actually live in this area, there were a lot of hospitalizations that year. A lot of people got cancer, you know, especially in the liver. It was serious. So you can definitely see just the color of the water is absolutely disgusting. It just literally clouds all of it. So you can't even see the bottom of the water. Like, it is bad. And so we're basically seeing an example of nutrient pollution. Because here's what happens. You know, we have nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrates, but usually phosphorus, or phosphate, I should say, is a lot more common in freshwater, whereas in marine waters, nitrates are more common. So basically these phosphates, they come from a variety of sources, you know, whether it be fertilizers, manure, or even just pollution in and of itself. I mean, there's a couple of different ways of how the water gets contaminated. But another issue is, you know, when it comes to manure spread, there has to be at least 81,000 acres worth of land. But the issue is, you know, there are parts of Mercer County that just, they don't have enough land to cover that recommended acreage. And so you could say there's like an overspreading of manure that is occurring. And oftentimes a practice that occurs is during winter, sometimes manure is spread. And the issue is the manure during that time of the year has no chance to be what you call degraded into the soil. And so basically, if any rainstorm occurs, you know, especially as it approaches spring, where the soil is still really hard, it'll just flow right into the Grand Lake. And there's also industrial runoff too that occurs, you know, whether it be from septic tanks or even, you know, streets. So it's a mess. Let's just say that. And unfortunately, the state of Ohio hasn't really stepped up to the plate. You know, honestly, they actually could really learn from what Lake Okeechobee is doing right now. You know, they're working with the Army of Corps Engineers, and they're also even consulting with a company known as Aquaculture, in which they use invasive plants, they turn it into a mush, and they also use that as a natural fertilizer. So it's like they're doing two great things at once. Instead of killing two birds, they are petting two birds with their hand. So, you know, they're essentially, you know, in Lake Okeechobee, they're using water hyacinth, which is an invasive aquatic plant. They harvest it, turn it into a mush, and then they use it on farmland. And, you know, since that's a more, you know, since that it's plant material, it has a better chance of basically degrading into the soil, essentially. Now, the controversy can be, you know, would it then cause, you know, more invasive plants to be introduced? Possibly. But, you know, using those types of methods can perhaps reduce the impact that is already occurring. You know, it may not completely get rid of the problem, but it can at least minimize the issue. So, I'll actually post a link to their page, by the way. Even though they're based in Florida, the practice that they're using could actually be used nationally or even globally too. So, all right, you guys, take care. I've already hit 12 minutes. It's time to wrap up the video. All right, you guys, take care. See ya.